All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Perceptive Podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we study the art and science of games. I am Josh Blazer, and we have another developer interview lined up for our show. He is a longtime guest of the chat. We have spoken many times in the past, and he's, of course, a developer over at Zachtronics, who have now become the coin of the subgenre Zach-like. And he is on to talk about Last Call BBS, as well as what's next for him. So, please welcome to the chat, Zach Barth. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great.
Alright, Zach, we are using your image. I didn't want to stretch it out too far. I didn't want to look like you're completely stretched on my overlay, so...
No, it looks perfect!
But it is great to have you back on. It's been a while since we last spoke, so... There's certainly, I think, a lot going on. So, I guess to get the ball rolling, how is everything with you, and what's happening with you and Zachtronics?
So we just released a new game called Last Call BBS. It is, appropriately, our last game as Zachtronics. So we're wrapping up new game development at Zachtronics, and Last Call is our last big game.
Hmm. And, I guess what led to the decision now? I was reading news pieces, and I heard that you were going to be a teacher, or you did teaching. How was it?
So I taught for a year. I was one of the funny. Hold on, let me get the cat out of here. They're just going to be yelling at me for food.
Yeah, stealth cat for people watching. And hello to chat. While we wait for Zach to get back, if you do have any questions for him, feel free to leave them in the chat, and I'll bring them up as we have time, as we fit into the flow.
I'm back. I thought he was going to be chill, but apparently not. The plan was originally, oh god, it would have been after Eliza and Malex and Tez. And kind of determined as a team that we kind of wanted to shut down Zachtronics at some point. We had at that point we kind of settled on 2 games. So that meant finishing up Mobius Front, which we were working on, and then making some unknown game after Mobius Front, which turned out to be Last Call. And the plan was to finish up those 2 games, shut down the studio, or at least shut down new game development. And then I would go just try to, do something new, like become a teacher. But it ended up taking us so long to make Last Call that I ended up getting a job as a teacher, right in the middle of it. And so, for all of last school year, I taught high school computer science at a school near me, while also running Zachtronics and working on Last Call and stuff. So, yeah. So that was, and then we wrapped up about a month ago, I guess, 5 weeks ago. I don't even know. It's been a while. 6 weeks ago, I guess, school ended. And that was my first and last year of teaching.
Ooh. So how was teaching after... I know we spoke a lot in the past about trying to integrate your games into school curriculums. I know you had your special program where schools could get school copies of your titles.
Yeah, so we have a thing called Zacademics where we give away all of our games for free to schools. We tried selling it at one point, but it was such a colossal pain in the ass that we just figured, we could just give them away for free. We'll make about the same amount of money, but it will, all the money that we don't get will go towards hypothetically better things, in the school budgets, like paying teachers to teach and stuff. And so I think we got our games into a lot more people's hands that way. I think the thing that kind of motivated me is that I had somebody contact me and they're like, okay, we want to buy one of your games. And it's like, well, why not all of them? And they're like, oh, we can't afford all of them. And it's like, well, here, why not have all of them? And then, now you have all of them. And so I guess technically we make a little bit less money off of it, but a lot of people get a lot more games than they would ever get. And so that's exciting, and especially being on the flip side of it, right? I had heard what it was like to be a teacher and try to buy software. Being on the other side, it's oh yeah, it's so much easier when this stuff is just free, because then you can just roll it out. You don't have to, get there's a lot more scrutiny when you try to buy something, both in terms of purchasing it but also using it, right? And if something is free, you don't have to really get somebody's approval in the same way that you might if you had to buy it. So it just changes that a lot. It makes it a lot easier. So yeah. I was always really interested in I would say the overlap between game development and curriculum development. And I think the idea was sort of that, like, oh man, if I'm this good at making what are basically educational video games, maybe I could make some really cool computer science curriculums for my students. And in practice, it didn't really matter that much. Teaching is so much more about like the performative aspects of being a teacher and just a bunch of other things that like I made like a programming curriculum and it was just like totally not appropriate. It was way too hard for like what the class was and like who was coming into it, and it's like, oh god, like this is so much not about just like this, like, especially as an indie game developer, where it's just like, I'm going to make whatever I want because I make indie games, and that's what being an indie game developer is largely about, right? Is just kind of doing your thing. And it's like, oh no, this is not about just doing my thing. This is about like responding to their needs and trying to help them. And it was a lot. It just, I don't know, like right away it was just like, well, I kind of, one of the ways I describe it is that I went in thinking like, okay, I'm going to, even if I don't like teaching that much and don't stay a teacher, I'm going to find out like some ideas for like things I could make and like, I maybe like sell to schools or make for schools or whatever. And right away it's just like, oh god, the last thing I need is more software. Like that's just not, like, at no point was I just like, god, I wish I had some software. Like that's not the kind of problems I ran into as a teacher. And so I learned a lot, but it was mostly about just how little I knew and how irrelevant all of my skills were.
Did you try to like force any kids to like finish Space Chem or Finifactory?
Oh god, not Space Chem. I didn't force anybody to play my games because I think then one of the big things about teaching is you don't want to get anybody's parents mad at you because then you'll get your admins mad at you, and so you want everybody to be happy. So like obviously nobody's going to get forced to play like my games because they're not even educational. But I definitely, I taught mostly one semester classes. So in the second semester, I switched to, I actually like broke out Opus Magnum and even Exapunks and Infinifactory, and just saying like, hey, like if you guys finish early, because I let them go at their own pace for the second semester. I said, if you guys finish early, I've got a bunch of games you can play. And they didn't all like it. Some of them, not everybody likes Opus Magnum. They're pretty good at it. They're better at it than a lot of adults I've seen like play our games, like pick up and play it at like at PAX or like GDC or whatever. They're pretty good at it. Some of them got obsessed with it. Like I had one kid who finished the entire game and then all of Opus Magnum. And then at the end, after he finished all of Opus Magnum, as the credits were rolling, I was like, what was the story in this game? Like, he didn't even pay attention to the story at all. He was just, like, optimizing the shit out of all the puzzles. And then he's just like, is there a place where people can write their names when they finish the game? I'm just like, yeah, I guess over there on the board. And he just, like, writes his name super huge on the whiteboard for people who beat Opus Magnum. So I had two kids who completely played through Opus Magnum. And then a bunch of them were playing, I had one kid who got really, really into Exapunks. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was pretty cool getting to watch them play my games. I almost didn't. Like the first semester I was just like, I'm not going to let them play my games. They're not educational. But the second semester I needed something for people to do who finished early. And so it was a welcome addition to my classroom. And they were free. What a great price.
And the kid who could beat Opus Magnum, I think that one's going to go on to places in terms of computer programming, maybe,
or video games. Christ, I don't know. But yeah, he was pretty. He took naturally to the programming thing too. But it wasn't even just that he was trying to play it. Like he was constantly asking me. He was like, what's the best possible score for this puzzle? Because I want to get it. And it's like, because I had on my phone. I didn't tell them how to find it because they had pictures of the answers on there too. But on Reddit, there's a leaderboard of the best known solutions. And so I would have that. I just had that tab open on my phone like just all the time because you'd just be like, what's the best possible solution for this puzzle? I'm just like, it's 46 cycles. And he's just like, what? And then I'm just like, yeah, it's 46 cycles. It's like, I've got 150. And it's like, yeah. So we talked about pipelining and some of the stuff. It was, I don't know. I wouldn't say it was super educational, but it was fun. It's the educational merits of school are debatable, but it's important to have fun. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. I guess as an interesting, a side question or a tangent there. Has teaching done anything in terms of changing your perspective on onboarding or even just tutorials for your games?
Oh, no, not really. If anything, I'm probably a little bit more jaded after teaching because it just felt like, I don't know. I think the way I definitely I mean I didn't obviously have a good reaction to teaching because otherwise I'd still be doing it. But I definitely felt a little hopeless because it's. like in games, I don't know. I feel like games is like you're giving everybody the exact same experience, and you're designing this like assembly line kind of process where you run people through it, and you don't really get to see like when you play test, you get to see people struggle with your game, but you don't really have to see all of your players like in general struggle with your game. But like in a classroom, like you really becomes you're so much more aware, and you have to be. It's like, how do I, what's going on with this student? How do I help them be successful? It's just like it's like an impossible task, first off, and it's just like so much more like personal and like in your face that I don't. It just feels like an insurmountable challenge if you try to like take it too seriously. And I guess like with the games thing now, it's just like I think when you're making a game and designing something where you don't really see it, you can kind of feel good about it. But like if you actually saw everybody who was playing your game, you would feel bad about it. So I think I feel maybe a little bit more jaded now. Christ, I don't know. I'm still trying to unpack it. I feel like I had like 5 years worth of like life lessons crammed into 10 months, and it's I'm still trying to figure out what it all means. It was very different from making games.
Yeah, I know I've spoken to a lot of teachers, I follow all of them on Twitter, who've been like trying to bring video games into the classroom or use games as a form of teaching, and it's certainly like, I think, a very like different universe. I think what a lot of people would expect.
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably really different if you're a teacher who's always been a teacher bringing video games in, rather than when you're like a games developer who's been thrown into teaching, and then it's like you can't really just reach straight for games because like I didn't know anything about teaching in general. So it's like it was like I said. I mean, the first semester I completely stayed away from games just because I didn't like that was what I already I don't know. I wanted to learn about the teaching stuff. It was I definitely I definitely see why we have career teachers now. It is a special skill. But yeah, a lot of teachers use games. Yeah, I don't. If they're doing it, it must be good.
All right. We have a few questions and comments come in, so let's go through a few of them. Thorn asks, one or two big things that have changed in the game industry over your time that you think people don't talk about enough or know about?
I'm old now. I've been doing this for Space Camp Count in 2011, and I'd been making games for a couple of years before that, just non-commercially. One of the big changes, I think there's a couple things. Obviously, microtransactions in games, that whole thing has like run its course while I've been in games. And so, I mean, I remember like Horse Armor, right? Do you remember Horse Armor? I don't remember what game was that for. Was that for
I think that was
one of the Elder Scrolls
Skyrim
games?
or Oblivion, one of the two.
Yeah. But yeah, like people were freaking out because they were selling special horse armor, and now we're like 10 years into that, and it's like every multiplayer game is free to play and just like riddled with things you can buy, and now they're like they're all deeply using like various like slot machine mechanics, and it's kind of I don't know, it's kind of crazy. We always like when we did Ironclad Tactics, which was like many games ago for us, we were just like one of our selling points on Steam was like, oh, there's no microtransactions. You just get the cards for playing the game. And now it would just feel like ridiculous to even call that out as a thing. Because everybody's like so on. I would say people complain about microtransactions, but it really seems like they're completely on board with them now. So that's definitely a change. But like, I don't even know if that matters that that's changed. Like, you just kind of have to be at the times. Games is such a whatever's popular is popular kind of thing. Like, there's no like big, like there's no game wisdom as you were about like, oh, like we shouldn't do this. It's like it's too late for that. Like, we're doing it. We're doing microtransactions. They're only going to get more.
Oh yes.
The indie thing, that was another. We started kind of right at the beginning of the indie boom, right? And now there's way more people making indie games now. There's way more funding models out there. There's a lot of people who are kind of technically maybe indie, maybe not, but like have way big, like $10 million budgets, right? The idea of like a $10 million budget for an indie game seems crazy to me, but like I don't know. It's just become so much more of a thing. But again, I don't really know what the lesson is there. It's just like, you look back and you're like, wow, things are really different. Like our people ask like about how to get started making games, and I think the implication is usually how to get started making games commercially, right? Anybody can make games non-commercially. You just make one and then you're done. Like it's people wonder, how do I make games and have it matter? And all of my advice on how to do that, I actually sort of increasingly feel like is really dated. Like when I started making games, I made them free. and then like I was able to build up an audience with free games. But I don't even know if like making games free is enough to build up an audience now. Like you just also have to stand out over the mess of so many other free games and games that are, it's like really like well-made game. Like, Blizzard makes free games now. It's like, how do you compete with that? Like, I don't. It's crazy. Like, I really don't know, right? And that's the thing where I don't have the answers, because I don't know if you can have the answers by looking backwards. One of my favorite like forgotten game things is, I guess it was probably around 2012 when people were really into the idea of casual games. Right? Where like Facebook games and like Farmville and stuff were really big. I remember reading a book about casual games. It must have been written in like 2008 or 2010 or something, and they're like, oh, like the coming casual games revolution. And people don't really talk about that anymore, right? I think like most of the people who weren't really gamers are just like, a lot of them are just like straight up gamers now. I guess like phones kind of like, I don't know, people just don't really make that distinction. It's kind of quaint, like if you go back and look at some of the literature from that time about like what makes a casual game. And it's just like, I don't know. I don't know. It's just like this weird, like kind of dated notion, and it's fairly recent. And the fact that it's dated and within like my span in the, working in games, it's like, oh God, like when you're in it long enough to see these trends come and go, it's pretty weird.
Oh yes, and my next book that's coming out next month is all about like the free to play mobile market, and a lot of that is talking about like how we went from $2.50 for horse armor, bad. Spending $2,000 on characters and gacha games, good.
yeah, it's crazy. I have a friend, like a close friend, who spent like $2,000 on a mobile game, or I don't remember if it was like Facebook based or mobile or whatever, but it was definitely like a free to play, quote unquote free to play game. Spent like $2,000 on it, and then they shut down the game. Yeah, it's wild. It's crazy.
Oh my, yeah, I haven't spent that much money on a mobile game yet, thankfully.
Yeah. It's a thing you can do, apparently.
Yeah, and like the funny thing, like sort of like the casual mark, is that like these days, like the best mobile games aren't even casual. Like they're like core and hardcore games. Like we saw like Genshin Impact is like making like truckloads of monies these days.
It's like I don't really play phone games. It's like a serious game.
Yeah, it's like pretty much like a free-to-play, like Breath of the Wild-esque kind of game.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, like there's a lot of money in these games these days, and like the whole kind of like casual thing, I think has really. It seems like the new trend now is a whole, quote unquote, like wholesome. Like we're seeing a lot more of those about
the
wholesome
cozy games and shit.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Oh yes. Let's see. Another question from Adam Volkenstein. What is the ETA like to run the Game Publishing Company Alliance?
What is the ETA like to? I don't understand the question.
I'm not sure either.
So I can talk about. I mean, so Zachtronics is part of Alliance, and we're gonna keep running Zachtronics, and we're gonna keep selling games. We're just not gonna keep making new games, and so things are kind of the same as before. It's just we're not making new games. So I'm still going to be answering all the support emails. I'm still going to be fixing all the weird bugs that pop up. So that hasn't changed. Just no new games.
All right. Let's see. Question from Rat's Tail. Are there any surprises you encountered when developing the language engines for your games?
Not really. I mean, they're pretty straightforward. I don't know. You just write like it's not even like a proper like complicated parser. Because there's no like nested things. It's pretty straightforward. You just kind of take it one line at a time and split on spaces and look at it. They're pretty straightforward. Yeah.
All right.
I think I don't know. I'm gonna have to get into the technical stuff with that. It's not that exciting.
Let's see, another question from Thorn. As someone who has done a Cadence/VLSI design a bit, have you seen more interest in it from your games?
I don't know what that means.
I'm sure Thorn's watching. They can elaborate. While we wait, I am VN wanted to let you know that they were happy to see a remake iteration on, I cannot pronounce that, KOHCT in Last Call, and they want to let you know that it is one of their favorites of your games.
Yeah, that's why I would say like twice a year I'd get an email. I made that, so I made Constructor in like 2009. And so every year I get like at least 2 or 3 emails from someone saying, when are you going to remake Constructor? It's so great. I'm just like, one day maybe or not. I don't know. And I'd actually been thinking about doing it for years. There's like a section in Zach like where I have some sketches about like an idea I had for it, but it never really made sense. Like I never, it was never a big enough idea to like turn into a full game on its own. And so it just like never happened, right? And then with Last Call, it was sort of perfect because we have space for little games for the first time, and it's like, oh, finally I can remake Constructor the way I've always wanted, where the puzzles don't require you to have gone to college for computer engineering, and it's a better game. And so in the 2 weeks over spring break when I was off from school, I banged it out from start to finish. It was pretty cool. It was good. I wasn't sure if I was getting weak after teaching for months and months and months, but I was able to bang it out most of the code in like 2 weeks. And then we put some art on it, made it look like a cool, like real life, like chip design program, and it was good. Yeah, I'm really glad we got to make that one. It's one of my favorites in the package. I think the puzzles are pretty fun too, if you can get past the whole concept.
All right. Let's see what else came in. Okay. Ori asked, do the teachers who encourage students to play this mostly see this as an intellectually stimulating activity rather than educational? Is there thought about the games we were mentioning
like
earlier?
The academics, the academics. Yeah, I think so. I think that like most teachers know what's going on, right? There's no way they could fit these, and like they don't come, like the games don't come with like a curriculum that you can use and follow. And so I think any teacher would recognize really quickly that it's like, oh, if I were to integrate this into my classroom and try to use it to hit educational objectives, it'd be a lot of work on my part. Because like the whole point of being in a class is you need to come up with activities so that way kids don't like get off in the weeds. You need everybody to kind of follow a track and get stuff done. And without us creating that material for teachers for our games, which we don't, it'd be really hard to use it in the classroom. And so I think a lot of teachers, and I think this is not a new thing either. Like when I was in elementary school, we would get to play educational games as a sort of like, what do we let these kids do? Like, they've gone beyond, like, or they have some free time. I don't know. It's just like, I think people use educational games a lot the same way they used to like 20 years ago, which is just as a vaguely educational seeming stimulating activity. It's better than the stuff they're playing on their phones, right?
Yeah, and I think like for like the teachers who like use like video games in the classroom, I know they really like structure like the curriculum and what they're teaching around the game, so they have to use very specific titles. So like, I don't think there's I don't think there's any teacher who's using Elden Ring as a teaching method right now.
Exactly, right? And you're only really going to get to use that game for like a day, maybe. So you have to there's so many constraints with actually using them in in a part of a lesson. Right. That's why having them is like, and I think our games are really good for it. That like they're played on computers. You're pretty much going to use them in a computer science class, which is already happening on computers. So like you just install the games on the computer lab computers, and then let kids play with them like when they finish up their activities. Like it makes a lot of sense. If we're making history games, they would have to be tied into lesson plans. We would have to write like the curriculum documents for teachers. Otherwise, they would just never really be able to use them.
Yeah. As a bit of a tangent, it makes me wonder, like, for all of us old people watching or listening, like, I remember the days of, like, Broderbund and the Learning Company, and I just wonder, just, like, did they ever actually do, like, any studies or, like, measure, like, were these games really effective in the classrooms? Because I played, so many of those Learning Company games back in the day. I just don't know if it actually, like, did anything. Or, is like the education more of like a secondary impact compared to the gameplay?
I think it's sort of a loaded question, because then you have to start thinking about like what does it mean for something to be effective in an educational environment, right? And it's like usually it's just like, are you getting the test scores you want, or are they like hitting the learning objectives for like learning different topics? And like, I mean, I would doubt that the games were very effective, right? Like, otherwise we would have, I don't know. It's like the same kind of thing happened when, like, movies came out, and like educational movies when they invented like film. And they're like, oh my God, like this is going to change everything. Like, we're going to put TVs in schools. And and they're going to like we're going to be able to show them video like multimedia, and this is going to radically change like the face of education. And like there was a thing in like the dark version of it is like in when they were trying to find more people to fight in the Vietnam War, they're like, hey, we can start recruiting people whose IQ would be too low to normally recruit, and then we can show them educational videos, and that'll make up for it, and that'll be the training we need. And this was like literally this was like a plan that like the military thought was gonna work, right? Because everybody was just like so bullish on this new technology, and it turned out that no, like film is not that much better at teaching than any other method, right? Like it's not like like a silver bullet that's going to fix everything. And I don't think computers aren't, games certainly aren't either, right? Games are actually kind of terrible for education. Like the whole premise of games, the best games are the ones that let us do whatever we want, and that's not how school works. Right? School is about trying to run a bunch of people through a relatively tightly focused like system, so that way everybody's like moving at the same rate, and you can actually help 30 people at once, right? And like games are the opposite of that, right? And a game would have to be really, really, really good for a teacher to be confident and comfortable just letting kids loose on it for like a week or two, and that like they're all going to do the right thing and still have it like be something that resembles what we would think of as a game. It's impossible.
Yeah. And I still remember from the 90s, everyone remembers like the laser disc when they had to be brought out for the
yeah.
Getting to feel really old for our cast today. Let's see. We talked about the teachers. To IMVN's comment about here at game developers actual slot machines. Yeah, it's something I've been wanting to talk more about. We just have to get them on and not like yell at them about those games. I did a conversation with Ramin Shokazai, who's a game economist, and we talk a lot about like wargaming.net and how these systems kind of derived and thrived. And that is one of the podcasts here on the channel. Let's see. Rob K asked, a while ago you mentioned a larger game made up of smaller concepts that eventually became TIS 100. Did Last Call scratch that itch for you, or would you like to try larger works like Last Call BBS?
Yeah, so you're talking about Second Golden Age. That was a game concept that I had that was made up of like 5 smaller games. I mean, that was, I would say I never necessarily was like, oh, I really want to make a game with a lot of small games in it. For Second Golden Age, that was just sort of what the game idea was. I guess it was kind of like a way to, it was like, oh, we could try making like I don't know, it seemed like it would be fun to make a bunch of small games, but it was never really like the goal to do it like that. That was more about realizing like the setting. Last Call was originally just one big game. It was originally just the Food Factory game, but before it was about making food in the future. But then we were having trouble turning that into a full game. We were all working remotely. It turns out it was a lot. We were working remotely on Mobius Front, but we'd already done the pre-production, so it was just sort of like, okay, everybody keep doing what you were doing, but do it from home. So that was pretty easy to do remotely. But starting a new game and doing pre-production remotely was really challenging, and that was when it. Like coming up with this idea of like, oh, we could make a game with a bunch of little games in it, and then we can kind of split off into smaller teams, and it'll be easier to handle that remotely. That was one of the big reasons to do Last Call as Last Call.
Let's see.
The slot machine question is interesting. The game developers of actual slot machines. So like there's a book, Addiction by Design, which is all about slot machines and like the effects they have, and like what modern players of slot machines are like, and who's playing them and how they're playing them. And it seems like for the people who are truly like hooked on slot machines, it's about just trying to, it's not even about winning or losing, it's about just kind of creating this liminal space that goes on for as long as you can possibly sustain it. And so it's almost like, I almost don't even know if real slot machines have anything to do with these virtual slot machines in games, because you can't, like, it just doesn't seem like when you buy items in these games that it kind of approaches that same sort of like penny slots, like, 8-hour long liminal space like effect that you get out of these mobile games. So I'm not really sure. I don't really know a lot about the psychology of people opening like crates and stuff in games. I always figured it was chunkier than like the penny slots. But Addiction by Design is, I only read like the first half of it because it's like a really huge book for a topic that I'm only like kind of interested in. But like it's interesting if you're interested in slot machine stuff and knowing how the people who design slot machines think and what they're going for. But it's actually kind of different from, well, I don't know. Yeah, it's tough to say. You should read the book.
Yeah, no, I do actually want to read that book. Yeah, and like the interesting thing, I know we're kind of getting on a tangent here, is that for a lot of the mobile games that I play when I was doing research for the book, a lot of that, it's not about putting the player in a spot where they're going to spend, 8-10 hours in front of their, phone trying to win this stuff. It's more about creating that really amazing prize that you can't live without, and then your goal is obviously to get that. So the second you get that, whether it's in 10 pools, 700 pools, whatever, then you're done. But then there's always another one that's going to come, a few months later, and then another one, and it's that just loop of there's always that new shiny that you have to go for.
Yeah, so like kind of like a collection mechanic, right? You're trying to get something specific that you want, and every time you pull the handle, there's a chance that you'll get it, and like eventually you'll, if you do it enough times, surely you'll get it. I did watch one of the same friend who spent $2,000 on a mobile or whatever game, spend $50 trying to get a specific skin for a Heroes of the Storm character. Like while we were playing, he was just like, okay, I'm gonna drop another like $20 in or whatever, because the only way you could get it was by buying one of those chests, and he really wanted it. And it was pretty funny how it was very quick. It did not take him long to spend $50, but he did get the skin eventually. So maybe that's a good example. I'm not sure.
Let's see. Thousand Moon asks, how much does Zach believe in if you build a great game with a known audience, they will evangelize it for you versus heavy indie marketing and selling yourself on social platforms?
Oh, I don't know if it's generally true. I know for us, we've never marketed like ever. I think we tried buying banner ads for Space Chem once like 10 years ago, and nothing came of it. Yeah, I don't know. We don't do any marketing. We've definitely experimented with hiring PR people, but all they did was email like news outlets and like YouTubers and stuff. And honestly, like whether people pick up on something, like whether a YouTuber plays your game, has to do with whether they're interested in playing it, which usually has less to do with whether they even like your game, but just more about like whether they think their audience will want to watch them play it. And so it's like, I don't even know how you can't game it, right? I don't know. I never felt like we never got our money's worth when we paid somebody to do PR for our games, right? Like we did jack shit for Last Call, and just because we had an interesting story of shutting down the studio, we got more coverage than we ever got when we paid people to like try to get coverage for our games. And I didn't really do anything at all. It just kind of happened, and all that coverage I don't think really translated into anything for our sales. Like sales for Last Call have been like a lot slower, we'll say, than like some of our other games, right? Opus Magnum, we did nothing to advertise that, and that did better than all of our other games because it's a good game that people want to play. And it had GIFs, and the GIFs look cool, but we put GIFs in a bunch of our games that never made a difference, right? The GIFs in Opus Magnum are just better because the game is just better. I don't know, right? I guess I'm kind of a believer in that, like, all you can do is build it. It's not necessarily that if you build it and there's an audience for it, you'll succeed, because I think it's totally possible that you could make a game for an audience and they would just never find it because there's so many games out there, right? And I guess that's where, like, the idea of paying somebody to get coverage for your game, but, like, I don't know. I mean, like, they seem pretty responsive if you, like, email their tip lines and say, here's a cool game. Like, if you actually had a cool looking game, like, I think they would cover it because they have an interest in it, right? I think that's kind of you just need to make sure that, like, the stuff you're trying to, like, trick, like, press people and streamers into doing is, like, as long as it's something that they have an interest in, doing, like, they'll do it, right? Like, they're just trying to make money by writing about games or by talking about games or by playing them for their audience. Like, I don't know. You kind of can't really game the system that much. It just kind of does its thing. It's just a giant machine that we're all plugged into.
Yeah, and I think, like, the more, like, depressing is that, or I guess in a small positive, is that the developers who did try to, like, game the system and, either, like, manipulate their reviews or do stuff like that, I think that's been largely called out, and we really, at least I don't hear about that much anymore. I remember that was kind of prevalent during, like, the early Steam Greenlight and that kind of era.
I think a lot of that stuff is just like a panic too, right? Like people are so concerned about ethics and games journalism with all the fucking Gamergate shit years ago, and it's just like what? Like reviews don't even matter. They don't even move the needle on your game, you idiots. Like it just, I don't know. I think people get really worked up about that kind of stuff, and it's just like nobody is looking. Like I guess like honestly, I don't know. Even like Steam, like people review bomb games. It doesn't like those games sell great, you know. Like I don't know. I think a lot of that stuff doesn't really matter that much. I really think the only thing that matters is what's the game you made, right? And then if there are people for whom that game is perfect, they will buy it and they will tell other people about it. Like you just have to make a game for people. That's like the best thing you can focus your efforts on. I don't know. It's stuff, but I mean, like you can't generalize any of this stuff. Maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe you do have to like do all this stupid stuff, and that's the way to be successful. Who knows?
I think reviews don't even matter. I think there's our quote for the podcast today.
I've said this before. I would rather have 10 times as many reviews for one of my games and have them be worse than have like what I have now, because that means that 10 times as many people are buying my game. And even if the return rate is higher, it can't be that high, you know, like you'd probably make a lot more money. Like our games have spectacularly high, like rating percentages, but all that means is we're meeting people's expectations. It doesn't mean the game is doing well. Like the number, like the percentage doesn't matter. It's that raw number. Like you want that game that's like a mixed review on Steam but has like 50,000 reviews. Like that is what success looks like. There you go. 50,000 reviews. Half of them hate your game. Half of them love it. They all bought it. So like they all played. The people who left those negative reviews probably played it for like 40 hours before they came to the conclusion that they were mad about it. But it's just like they're not getting their money back. Fuck it.
Nice.
I don't know.
Let's see. Thorne did elaborate earlier about cadence, and he was talking about a gate level chip design. So something like Shenzhen IO and that kind. Let's see.
Oh, I guess you're asking if people are more interested in those tools because they played my games. I'm not sure. I don't really know, right? I have heard people say that. The thing we hear a lot more of is that like people get into programming from our games. That's sort of the more obvious leap. Is that I've gotten, especially now we're shutting down the studio, I've gotten so many emails from people who are just like, "Oh, thank you, you got me into programming." And it's just like, "Oh, yeah, that's kind of cool." It's I don't know. Yeah, we probably got more. I got way more people into programming from making games than I did from teaching. That's for sure.
I'm just waiting for someone to send an email saying, "I build a death ray thanks to 100% all your games."
Definitely not.
Excuse me. Adam asked, or they elaborated. What is the steps for you to move to publishing from game dev, and what are some games that you've published so far?
What are the steps for you to move from publishing? I'm not in publishing.
I think they're talking more about that Alliance thing, or...
Oh, yeah, Alliance did publishing, but I had nothing to do with that.
Okay.
Yeah, all I've ever really been involved with was the development of all those Zachtronics titles. I'm a game developer. That's my thing.
Okay. Let's see, they also asked, what about games, when we were talking about, I guess, games providing kind of like an educational slant, what about games like Turing Complete and MHRD, where every puzzle actually describes in real-life logic and hardware, as opposed to gameplay mechanics?
Yeah, those are games where you actually do something that's kind of close to real-life digital design in a game. Yeah, and there's programming games where you write in JavaScript, too. It's just not... I don't know. It was never my interest, right? I like making games that are sort of inspired by real things, but very much are interesting game mechanic systems. So I've never been interested in making a game that's about like just like straight up real life digital logic, right? Like the first Constructor was kind of like that. And when I got to remake it, I tried to remake all the puzzles so that there was no binary in it. All of our programming games famously are base 10. There's no binary numbers anywhere in it. I'm less interested in making something that's realistic and educational and just making something that's interesting. Like that's the most important rule of making games is be interesting, right? And sometimes, you know, I mean, some of the Turing Complete actually did really well, right? Like, so sometimes being realistic is how you're interesting, but I was never interested in being realistic for realistic's sake.
Let's see. The other question that came in. Let's see. I cannot pronounce that name. Kanango Bert asks, can you elaborate a little bit about Sigma's Garden in Opus Magnum? I did not get that far in the game, so I do not know the topic there.
Yeah, so Sigmar's Garden is it's a solitaire game in Opus Magnum, where it's kind of like the old what's it called? Like Shanghai, like the old like mahjong tile matching game that was super popular like in the 80s and 90s. So you remove pairs of the marbles from the board. Yeah, that was I talked about this in Zachtronic. I knew there was going to be, so we'd made the first solitaire game in a Zachtronics game was in Shenzhen.io, which came out before Opus Magnum. And so I knew I wanted to do kind of more little mini games in the games because they're a fun little design diversion. You know, I get to design a second game in my game. So it takes us like a year to make a full game. So I spent a lot of time working on a little like tactics game where you had like little like musketeers like fighting in the streets like that the game took place in. And I spent forever working on it, and I was never really able to make a version of it that people understood. And so eventually I was just like, you know what, this is way too complicated. I just need to make like a solitaire game. So I just like sat down and wrote out some rules for a solitaire game that reused the marbles from the game, and it instantly worked and was great. So it took like a day to just design it completely, and that was basically the one we shipped. So yeah, I talk about it in Zachtronic. I think it kind of goes into more detail and shows pictures of both of these things. But you can play the tactics, the digital version of Zachtronic on Steam. You can play the tactics game that I made that and discarded. It's kind of cool. I always thought it was fun, but yeah, it was too confusing.
Right. Let's see. That one. Let's see. A mouse in red car asks, do you think games might work better for self-guided education without school? Do you think we will have schools like today in 100 years? Now that's a question.
I mean, there's the law that like however long something's been around, that's how long you can expect it to continue existing, right? So schools in their current form have been around for a while. So I think it's possible that at least in 50 years we could still have schools like we have now. I don't. Games are better as self-guide. I don't really think so, right? Because the whole point of education, like this is where it comes down to like, what is education? It's kind of about learning and acquiring skills, but it's also just kind of about like complying and being like part of a structure, right? Like this is one of the things that I didn't really like about school is that it just so much of it was just about the construction that is school. Right? Like so much of the way we did things was that like, okay, we have to be able to track where all the kids are at all times. So they always need to be in a class, which means that we have to put people into classes that they don't necessarily want to be in because they have to be in a class. Right? So there's all these kinds of weird like artifacts of the way that school exists. And like it wasn't really just about like skills acquisition, and it wasn't about like acquiring skills that would be useful, right? So I don't really think that games would fix education because I don't really think that like education is already kind of doing a bunch of weird other stuff. Like it depends what your goal is for education, right? If it's to prepare people for jobs, I think you'd be better off just having them do jobs than play games, right? Like you just don't really need to play game. Like I don't. It's like this is one of the things where I had a lot of ideas this coming in, and now I'm just sort of. It's just like this impossibly large question. It's just like, what is education? Well, it's just whatever we do right now. It's like, what should we be doing? It's like, well, whatever people want. Like, I don't know. It's there's just no like. I don't think there's not really a real definition of what education is in a way that like I think everybody could agree on it. As soon as we all know that you do school because like you have to, and as soon as you start digging into it to try to figure out what's important to everybody has totally different ideas about which parts of it matter and which parts matter less and how it ought to be done, and suddenly you'll realize that no one has anything in common with what they believe about it than anybody else, and that's why we just do what we do.
Yeah, I know. I've been trying to get a podcast with some teachers I know talk about games in the classroom. We're still in the time zone nightmare phase of trying to get that going. And I remember we did our podcast about edutainment and talking about like the Common Core curriculum and how hard it is to like bring anything in that would either get in the way or supersede that.
Oh yeah, no, totally. It's yeah. I don't know. That was my big lesson from school was just don't bother with education. Just do the stuff that you think is important. You don't have to say that it's educational, so therefore it's important. You can just say I think this is important just because I think this is important, so we're going to do it.
Let's see. Another question from Ori. They ask, do you have any interest in designing board/card games without having to code them?
I like the idea of board and card games, but I hate playing them. I really don't like playing games at all that much anymore, but I really don't like playing board games. It's terrible because I'm a designer, and like I love the idea of board games, and I love like the way that they're made out of like cardboard and like the way that they're assembled. Like I love the manufacturing aspects of it and how it like comes together. Like just pieces of cardboard can be like so cleverly designed that it creates this like amazingly textured product. Right, and like the little pieces of cardboard can fit together and stack, and like you can do so much with it. It's so expressive. I love how like I just find it really, really fascinating. But unfortunately, I just don't have the patience to play any board game where it's like I really can't be like bothered to like read a bunch of rules and like try to keep track of them all in my head and like just spend like hours doing it. Like there's just not enough drugs in the world to like put me in the right state of mind to actually like not just be like suffering the whole time I'm playing a game. And it's terrible because like I wish I was the right kind of person for it, because like I have friends like this who love board games, and I just wish I could, but I'm not cut that way, so I can't. I think that if I was the kind of person who could play board games, I would be all over that shit. Because if you look into our games, especially like the tactics games and stuff, and the ones that start to get more gamey, I love making games about like small countable numbers. Like Opus Magna, or not Opus Magna, like Mobius Front and Ironclad Tactics are basically like board games, right? Like they have small, tiny numbers. Like the systems are all really like discrete and like simulatable, you know, like with physical like board game methods. Like you could totally turn those directly into board games with like the right pieces of cardboard and the right pieces of plastic. But yeah, I just can't do it.
Yeah, like I know if Thorn is still watching, like we play like tabletop games in the past, and I've played them, but it never was something that I had the desire to play like on my own. Like I just don't have like that mentality to say, oh, I'm going to load, but I'm going to take a tabletop game and start playing it. Whereas with a video game, like I've always liked, I guess, the compact nature that this is a game. Here are the rules. This is what I need to do to win. Okay, go kind of thing.
When it runs the rules for you.
Yeah.
You don't have to like run the rules in your head, which is actually a lot of work, right? You can just jump right in, and like board games require, you can't jump into board games often, right? But you can just jump into a video game. Like video games are so slick, right? Like that's why they're so popular, So I don't know.
Let's see. Those Moon said, it seems like Zach has managed to keep a tight, focused scope to almost all of his games. Any tips for avoiding scope creep?
Oh God, I don't know. I get bored, like and ship. I don't know. It took years to build up the sense of scope and shipping that I have. Started with really small projects. I was always really focused on getting them done and shipped out the door before I got bored with it. Right. A lot of my early games, I actually like. What I'm trying to think, like Ruck Engineer 2 was supposed to be 7 levels, but then I only shipped like 4 of them and then said to be continued. And like a bunch of my games were like that, where I was just like, I had ideas for a bunch of levels and I'm just like, I ran out of steam, so I'm just like, oh, to be continued. And like obviously I never continued those. Like I had no intention to, really. I just wanted to ship the game and get it out the door. And so I think you just need to have like a strong, but like I didn't choose to have that desire. I just do have like a strong desire where it's just like, I want to stop working on this, let's ship it. Right, and that's the key, right? And it's really easy to come up with lots of ideas, and then it's really easy to say, yeah, I don't feel like programming that, let's cut it, right? Like I don't know, I've never been the kind of person that's like, oh, I have to do everything possible. I'm very much good as what is it? Perfect is the enemy of the good, right? Like you just it's really about just like my whole life is just like good enough. But I don't know if you can like learn how to be that way. I just am. I feel like that everything I do is just a reaction of how I am. Right? Nothing is deliberate. I wish I had deliberate control. If I had deliberate control over myself, I would be so much more successful. Because it's so easy to see the stuff that like, oh yeah, this would be a good kind of game to be interested in making. Like we tried to make a game about like crafting and like exploration and that kind of thing, and just like 2 months in, I'm just like, wow, I fucking hate this game. Like I need to stop working on this because I'm so bored. and I can't even imagine how to make this fun because I'm so bored. So, like, if I could choose who to be, I would choose to be someone much more successful. But you kind of just have to make do with who you are and what you're into and what you're like.
So does that mean we're not going to see a Zach-like Factorial-like anytime soon?
Oh, fuck no. I just couldn't, right? I could never. I just don't care about virtual resources, right? Like, it's just so, like, I don't really know how the systems work, and I never really cared enough to try. And it's just like, it just doesn't do it for me. Yeah. I would have been so much better off, too. It's a goddamn shame. There's plenty of people making games like that too. That was what I always kind of told myself, right? Like, there's not enough. There weren't enough people making the kind of weird stuff that I wanted to make. There were tons of people making Factorio, like namely Factorio. You know, so they got that stuff covered.
Let's see. Xavier asked, "Every Zachtronics games I play, I absolutely love, even though I hit a brick wall." And they want to know, what do you go through to build the worlds within their games?
I don't know. We usually just come up with an idea and then explore it, right? A lot of our games are about work, and so each of the puzzles is an item of work from the world that the game exists in. And so I think some of the most successful ones were like Shinshin.io, where you work at a factory designing like kind of weird little like electronic goods for people abroad, right? And so each puzzle is an item, and each item is an artifact that comes with like cultural baggage and a little story of how it got made and who it's for and kind of what like misconceptions or like inform that, like the sandwich maker for Americans with a little American flag that pops up because Americans love sandwiches and are patriotic. Like it's a dumb joke, right? But it's like it's from that world, and in it, like that's like that's like you just stack 20 or 30 of those together and now you've got world building, right? That's our way of doing it. And we do that if you look at all of our games. We do that with all of our puzzle games. Opus Magnum was the same way, right? Like creating a narrative arc where like what are all the different items. They're very materialist games, right? What are all the items that you need to pull off this great scheme, to get revenge, right? Well, it turns out you need a lot of items to get revenge, and so we have you build all of those items. And it just gives you a lot of opportunities. I think looking at like it's kind of like a kind of archaeology thing, right? Like when you look at people's artifacts, you learn a lot about them. Like humans are tool using animals, right? And so I think like looking at people and their ways of life through their artifacts is something that I always found interesting. I've always liked things and inventions, and that's just kind of carried through into our games.
Do you have any particular like favorite like world that you built for one of your games?
Oh, it's Exapunks for sure. Because Exapunks is like, I when I was a kid, I was in high school, I discovered the movie Hackers in 1995, which is like, it's not about real hacking, but it's this really cool, very like 90s. There's like, it's got like Club Kid vibes. It's got like weird like cyberpunk vibes. It's got like all these cool 90s things, and it made hacking look so much cooler than it was. And I always found that really, really exciting. And so with Exapunks, we kind of got a chance to make our own version of like a kind of retro cyberpunky, kind of like club influenced hacker world. And so that one is by far my favorite. There's a ton of like not really inside jokes, but just like things I like just kind of jammed in there like aggressively, sometimes nonsensically. It's definitely my favorite.
All right, let's see. Adam asked, why have most creative Sokoban puzzle games like Bob Loves You, Monsters Expedition, and Patrick's Power Box come so late from the OG Sokoban, in your opinion?
Oh, I don't know. You're asking the wrong game developer. I don't. I like somebody's answer that the Sokoban Renaissance is 60% thanks to Puzzle Script. I think that is very much true. I think it's very possible, right? I also think people like copy it from each other. Like people see other people making innovative Sokobans, and they're just like, "Oh, I could do that too," right?
Mm-hmm.
There's Sokobond, which is like a kind of Space Chem Sokoban crossover from like 10 years ago. Like I feel like that's about when I started seeing like cool Sokoban things. But I'm very much the opposite of that kind of puzzle designer, right? Because those are all like actual puzzles where I just make work for people to do. Cool work with cool tools. But I rarely make things that resemble actual puzzles. Dungeons and Diagrams in Last Call is kind of like a real puzzle, but even then they're kind of made haphazardly.
I think that's the one that I'm like the furthest in so far in last fall.
That's a good one. A lot of people are enjoying that. It's pretty simple to make. I like it.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Eric B said Shinzen's story felt sad/dark, at least the beginning. With the commoditization of engineering, is that the present and or future you see?
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's the present, right? We were talking about the present with everything in Shenzhen. I don't think it's sad or dark. A lot of people picked up on the vibes where, like, they're doing a little bit of like security work, and one of the guys is a pacifist. And everybody read that, they're just like, oh, it's about like China and how they're like militaristic police state. And it's like, no, like the British guy is just a pacifist and doesn't want anything to do with defense like work. And like it's much more like in America, like when when Microsoft and in like Amazon and stuff do work for ICE, and like a lot of people there nope out because they don't like the political ramifications of it. And it's kind of more like that, but everybody was just like, oh, this is so dark. It's like, no, they're like, it's building up to something dark, and it's like, it's not. And if you play through the game, it's really not. It's just like weird kind of, yeah, like it's definitely about like materialism and stuff like that. But it's I don't think it's particularly dark or sad. I think the reality is that if you want to be an electrical engineer, like it is, I think there are fewer jobs doing that here in America than there used to be. A lot of our electronics like capabilities have moved. I don't even know if they were in America, honestly. Like a lot of it was in Japan in like the 90s, right? That's where all like the hot shit electronics came from. That's what last Call BBS is about. So I don't even know enough like statistics to know if it actually has moved or where it's moved from to. But I don't know, stuff's always changing. Shenzhen was really just about like trying to capture a moment. One of the primary, there were a couple, so we made that game in like 2016, and I'd say like around like 2013 was when I started seeing people online talking about Shenzhen and how it was becoming the electronics capital of the world. Now it like, absolutely is. But I just found that really fascinating, right? And Shenzhen IO is just a deep dive, and that's why it's in the name of the game, right? It's just a deep dive into like what's the current state of Shenzhen, what are some of the aspects of its like weird particular culture, right? Like there's a really good episode, I think it's Planet Money, where they talk about Shenzhen and they talk about like hoverboards. And like how like maybe you just have like how the hoverboard was invented, right, or at least turned into a very like accessible consumer product. And there's like a guy who makes like runs a factory that makes electric motors, that is having drinks with a guy who runs a factory who makes batteries. And they're just like, hey, what if we put motors on batteries, and like a week later they've got a prototype of a product, and a week later they're selling it. And it's just about that kind of like rapid like bringing products to market. And often like the versions of it we heard were always like people having these just like drunken outings where they're just inventing products, and then like they make them like the next day because they have all the tools there. And I just thought that was really exciting, right? And wanted to kind of explore that. And we made fun of a lot of stuff in life with Shenzhen IO, but like just like VR, people looking at weird VR content. I just come off working at Valve on VR, so we made fun of VR. We made fun of like live streaming. We just made fun of all the things we thought were funny. We made fun of Bitcoin before it blew up into what it is now, right? It's all. Yeah, I don't know. It ended up being kind of there's a thing where if you just make science fiction that talks about the present, it seems really like futuristic, and then people are like, "Whoa, it all came true," and it's like, "Well, yeah, we were just talking about the present."
Let's see. Did that one? Ori asked, most of your games have physical feelies, and they want to know why.
They're fun. Right? We did so TIS. We made TIS 100. It was a game about assembly programming. I started trying to build a tutorial for it, and I'm just like, no, I don't want to write a tutorial that tries to walk people through learning every instruction. And so we're like, we'll just make a manual, and it'll just come with a manual, and people can just figure it out, right? And that was how little we cared about TIS 100. And it worked fine, and it was great. And people thought the manual was fun. And so when it came time to do Shenzhen IO, and then later Exapunks, we're like, we're gonna do a better job making the manual. We're gonna make it more of a thing. For Shenzhen IO, we're like, we're gonna make it a whole collection of data sheets. It's going to come in a binder. Fuck it. We're going to sell a physical version in a binder, and it can come with other stuff too. And then Exapunks, we took it even further. Exapunks was always meant to be zines, because that was when I was into hacking as a high schooler. I used to read 2600, which was a little like 8.5, letter, like half letter folded zine. And it was the coolest thing, right? And so we got a bunch of zines professionally printed, because we can, and it's cheap, and it's awesome. Right. And I think that it was just, I don't know, the feelies was just a thing that it's not even like I was really nostalgic for game manuals, because like game manuals kind of sucked in a way. Having to read a manual to figure out how to play a game, I don't really want to do that. I was lazy, you know. It's not like I was really into like Infocom games and their feelies, because I didn't play those as a kid, you know. Like, I just think people love physical stuff. I think now that everything is so digital, there's like a nostalgia for physical things, right? Like, people ironically, or maybe not even ironically, just nostalgically, ironically, buy records, CDs, tape cassettes, even though we have all the music available online. Right? Like, people like physical things. The fact that so few things are physical now makes physical things more special. I think you can kind of overdo it, right? I think everybody rushing, you know, I don't know, like I feel like we maybe overdid it a little bit. But yeah, it's just a fun thing to do. Yeah. We had some, I feel like a lot of our physical things got more and more deranged. Like for last call, for a long time, we were thinking about doing like a big, you know, like software used to come in big boxes. And so we were thinking about making like a big software box, as if it was like a game you could buy in the 90s, and it would be like this big box, but it's like, oh god, these boxes are going to be like $5 a piece.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, this is maybe not worth it. Nobody wants a box, like an empty box. Like, what a stupid thing to sell. It would have taken us months to like do the artwork for it. We did not make the box. But yeah, it was, I don't know. It's fun to do. The patches are kind of their own thing too. Like the achievement patches, like, oh, our games are so hard, you should have a little like physical memento if you beat it. That was the thing we've kind of dabbled in and out of, but it seemed appropriate to do it for last call.
Let's see. IMVN asked, I found the last levels in Infinite Factory to be daunting. And they were wondering, what sort of completion metrics do you see towards the ends of your games? I know this was a discussion we've had, I think, on a few of our previous casts.
Yeah, they're appallingly low. I mean, it's you can look at Steam, right? There's an achievement for beating the game on Steam. I'm sure it's just like 0.1%. Let's see. Steam achievements deleted in a factory. So yeah, the final one, 1.6% of people. That seems really high. I don't think it's 1.6%. Those last puzzles are hard as hell. So I don't know what my statistics say.
And it looks like 5.3% beat Space Chem.
That's bullshit. I know. My understanding is that number is like 2% tops, probably lower.
Let's see. Okay, Mr. Game in Chat asks, could you ask if developers' political leanings dictate their game's success?
I don't know how to answer that one. I don't know. Probably hard to make games that are like weird, ironic Marxist critiques of things if you're not a Marxist, so I don't know.
Let's see. Oh, as a quick time check, we just passed over now. We haven't even really talked about Last Call yet. I do want to spend some time on that. How are you doing time-wise for yourself?
Oh, I'm good. It's not. Okay. It's really hot where I am today, but I'm still cool in my room, so we're good.
Yeah, I'm in my own little sauna, so I'll sweat it out a little bit longer. Let's see. Let's see. Princess Castle Quest asked, do you think a decent portion of that completion percentage comes from people following tutorials?
I think that's possible. So I had never considered this until like yesterday. I was lurking on our Discord, and I saw some people saying that like one of the last puzzles for the Constructor remake Chip Wizard in Last Call, one of the last puzzles, the histograms for it had a huge spike on a very good score. And they were blaming it, the people who were in Discord were blaming it on somebody published a guide on how to beat every puzzle in Chip Wizard, and they included screenshots of solutions, and a lot of their solutions were like really, really good ones. And usually, I guess they seem to be of the belief that usually when people make these guides, they use particularly bad solutions. But this person had used good solutions, and it just totally fucked up the histograms. And it never occurred to me before, like yesterday, that people following guides just to get through and get all the achievements for games were like ruining our histograms. And I actually like I said, this was yesterday. I haven't had time to react on it. I guess like we're done making Zachtronics games, so I guess this is always the thing, right? Like, this is why I hate achievements, right? Achievements are so stupid. They just encourage people to do dumb stuff just for like a little stupid little tiny icon on Steam that says you did a thing and probably cheated. I don't know. I was sort of upset by it actually, but I haven't really processed, what I want to do about it, if anything.
Well, there's for everyone watching. There's the next big controversy: the histogram inaccuracy.
Yeah, turns out our histograms are garbage. Yeah. I don't know. And we don't collect people's full solutions, so it's not even like I could set up a filter and filter out a particular one. Maybe I could filter out particular score triplets for the games that have. I'm not really sure. Yeah, I don't know. Never thought of it. That's the nice thing about histograms is they're kind of vague enough that usually no one can tell what's going on. They can just say oh look, I'm on the good side, But maybe they were always totally wrong and we never knew until just now. Wouldn't that be funny?
Let's see. Following some tutorials from the later levels of Steven Sausage Roll. I cannot play that game. I am terrible at it. Reminds me a little bit of that Bonfire Peaks game that came out last year, too. So, I guess to get to Last Call, then. I guess one question I want to ask you. So, this kind of was brought up earlier, but for people who are just tuning in or missed that question and so on, what was kind of the inspiration to build Last Call around the collection of smaller games, as opposed to, again, just, one giant game?
Yeah, so we started off building what was basically a big version of 20th Century Food Court, except it was set in 1989 in Japan, right at the height of the economic boom, and you were working for a company that just, dabbled in everything, and you built factories. That was our original idea. We had a lot of trouble kind of figuring out what the game was about and figuring out how to make it interesting enough, because a game where you're making TVs is not super interesting. There's not that much to say. There's not a lot of funny writing to talk about TVs. It just wasn't really, I don't know. We had the same thing with Exapunks for our first version of the Exapunk story. It seemed really cool when I came up with it with Matthew, and then when I read it, I was just oh, this seems kind of mundane. So we had some problems with that. We had the production issues we were talking about, where having everybody try to do pre-production remotely on a new game was kind of challenging. Yeah, we were just kind of having trouble making that game. And one of the things that I was kind of planning for after we finished that game was to make a bunch of little games. Just to, what's the title? I had a little name I gave it. It was called, what was it? Oh, it was called Unfinished Business. So Zach Barth's Unfinished Business was the title of the game. And it was going to be a collection of a bunch of ideas that I'd kind of come up with, but never actually made. And so I was what if I could bang out a really quick version of it so I can at least check it off my list? And so that was the plan. And when we had a lot of trouble with the big factory game, I started thinking okay, what if instead of trying to make a big factory game, we just made this one of the small games and we did Unfinished Business as our game, but rather than trying to do it on my own or in a small capacity, we just use it with the full strength of the Zachtronics team. And I sort of asked one of the people working on one of the artists, I'm just what would it look like if we had a little desktop with some windows on it? And he kind of did a little mock-up, and I was oh yeah, this is great. Dungeons and Diagrams, I wanted to make a digital version of Dungeons and Diagrams because originally it was just a paper puzzle. And so I had done a mock-up of what if I made it as a Windows 3.1 game, the original Minesweeper. And because I was, I like programming games for old computer systems. And so I was maybe I'll make a Windows 3.1 version. And then when I was kind of putting all these ideas together, I'm just you know what, if I make a Windows 3.1 version, no one is going to play it because that's a dumb idea. But if we did this minigame collection, we could make it a game in there. And so I had the artists kind of mock it up, and we're okay, this looks super cool, seeing in a little window. We've got our own little desktop style. So we iterated on that a bunch, and that was where I kind of pivoted everybody, saying okay, we're going to make a bunch of little games. And for a while, we weren't sure how we were going to release them. If we were going to do it all in one big go, or if we were going to release maybe 2 games every month or 2 games every quarter for a year. In the end, we just did one big package of them, which I think did okay. It's kind of hard to figure out okay, we're going to make 8 games at once. How do you release them maximally? You could do them if you do them all at once, people might only shallowly engage with them. But if you do them once a quarter, people are going to forget about it and get bored. And so you don't want to be on the hook to make 6 more games when no one's paying attention. So we ended up kind of just saying like, okay, we don't even want to know how well this game's going to do. Let's just bundle them all up and release it at one go. At least then we'll have the motivation to finish everything. We did that with Ironclad Tactics. We kind of thought Ironclad Tactics was going to be a huge hit, and so we committed to making all this DLC. And then it was not a huge hit, and we were still on the hook for DLC, and we'd like pre-sold it to everybody who bought the deluxe edition and stuff. So we had to follow through with making the DLC for a game that we were kind of disappointed with, and so we didn't want to make that mistake again.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what's kind of interesting is that I'm actually writing a piece that's going to include Ironclad Tactics. It's going to go up in a few days. I'll link you to it when it gets up there. Let's see here. So I guess one thing I was curious about, in terms of some like the other games, like let's see, the Forbidden Path. I actually brought up the store pairs. I forgot all the names of it. The Hobby Studio one I thought was very interesting. As someone who tried building like those like Gundam models back in the 90s. Yeah. I guess what was the inspiration for like some of like the, I guess like not so much like programming, but just like some like the model kits and some like the more like relaxing games in the collection.
Yeah, that's you can see a lot of the history of this game in Zach, the book that I did, because for years I've wanted to make a game about like Gundam models, right, or like Japanese model kits. When I went to Japan in like 2013 and like went to a bunch of hobby stores and like bought a bunch of model kits and stuff, because they just always, I don't know, like I'm shit at putting together models. I can't paint stuff to save my life, but like I always really like the idea of them. Like this is the kind of thing I wish I was good at, but it turns out in real life it's really hard, and so like I don't have the patience to be good at it. But I've always been really fascinated with it, and I've had a bunch of ideas for games about like putting together models. And tried to make that happen and could never make it happen. And it turns out that, like, I would say over the last couple of years, one of the artists at Zachtronics, who I've worked with for many more years, got really into Gundam model kits. And unlike me, he actually has the skill and the patience to do it. And so he's been putting together Gundam model kits. He's really fucking into it. They look really great. And we were just like, when we started going back to the office, we were all kind of staggered because it was depending on like who was willing to drive farther to get a vaccine earlier. And so like I drove like halfway across Washington State to get vaccinated so I could get back to work faster. And so we did, and it was just me and the Gundam model kit artist Kyle in the office, and we were going for a walk, and I don't even know how we got on the topic, but we're talking about Last Call and like what other games we wanted to, we were like well into Last Call then, and talking about like what he wanted to do next, and we were talking about like, like could we do like a Gundam thing, and that was kind of when it occurred to us that like, oh, we could just make a game that's just like assembling Gundams, and like it's not like a cute like metaphorical puzzle about putting together model kits. You really just snap together model kits. And he was like 110% on board with it. And we just played it completely straight, right? Like it's the only thing that's weird about it is that it's 2D rather than 3D, which you would kind of assume, but making it 2D made it something that we could make easily and made it look like good, I think. And it just kind of worked. Yeah. And it wasn't like necessarily meant to be like a laid back game. It was just like, it just ended up being what it was. Right, like it just is a Gundam, not Gundam, because they're definitely not Gundams. It is a a Japanese style robot model kit assembly game, right? And it just is what it is, and ended up being what it is. And a lot of people weirdly liked it and have been asking us. They're like, "Oh, make a full version." It's like, oh no, this game took forever to make. It took him like a month to make each model kit. And then there was still a bunch of work on top of that to like actually finish them all up and lay out the runners, and that game took so much work. It was crazy. And considering it only takes like an hour to put one of them together, right? Like a month of his time for an hour of game time. Like it was very expensive. I think it paid off though, because like he knows all about like how the model kits go together, and so he tried to like preserve like a lot of the sort of like the kind of like the little techniques that they use to build, like design the kits. He tried to work that into his designs for his kits so that it would feel authentic to like building these model kits, and I think it really paid off. It's not just like a jigsaw puzzle. Like it's really meant to feel like like what it's like. Like the idea that like the legs are all made out of like two halves, and you snap all those together, and then you kind of paint those as a whole, and then you can start assembling those together, and the way like the arm and leg joints work and all that stuff. And I had a couple people who thought the little missiles on the one that has all the missiles on his chest was hilarious because that's like exactly what it would be like on like a Gundam kit. It's just like a zillion little missile pods to snap in and paint and stuff, and so it was I think it worked out really well.
Mm-hmm. And you get that sweet dopamine release when you finally get the pieces connected and everything lines up. Yep.
Yeah, it's good.
Let's see. Xavier asks, was your real game that inspired Hack Asterisk Match?
Hack Match, yeah. So Hack Match debuted in Exapunks. When you hack a game console to play imported games, you can play Hack Match. And we made Hack Match for Exapunks, and then we made a Nintendo, like an NES version of it. And then we actually made some improvements. We added like a 2-player versus mode when we did the NES mode. So we remastered the original one into Last Call, and added a bunch of new art, added a 2-player versus mode, added a 1-player versus mode, added back in endless mode. We did a lot of stuff with it. It's very much I guess technically it's kind of like a Magical Drop clone, except I'd never played Magical Drop before. I'd played Money Puzzle Exchanger. So it is... when I was at Valve, one of the guys I worked with was really into action puzzles, and so he turned me on to Money Puzzle Exchanger, which I really like. And we played a bunch of in the office. It's a super cool game. And so it's not really like a clone of Money Puzzle Exchanger, but like the way like it's got stuff in common with it. I also played a bunch of I don't know. I just kind of got into a bunch of those games like Tetris Attack and other stuff. So. Yeah, I like action puzzle games. They're fun.
Let's see. Rob K asks, I recently got a group of my friend into Nerds. The theme is an excellent break from us lovingly swearing at each other mid-match. Was this on purpose, design-wise?
Oh no! So Nerds is free, so you have to put up with all my crazy shit. So we used to play. So the origins of that game came. So Nerds is like a real card game. We did not invent it. The Gundam artist Kyle, he grew up playing it as a kid, and so he taught us how to play at the office. And every day after lunch, we would play a game of Nerds, and we would have like a big score tally going, and have little tournaments that would span like a week or two. So we were really into Nerds, and when we all got sent home for COVID, I built an online version so we could play remotely. And eventually we were able to polish it up and ship it out as a product. But when I don't remember, like early on when we started playing Nerds in the office, we needed like a way to start the game. And so I built like a little phone app that we could all like hold down buttons. Like there'd be 4 buttons, and like everybody holds down a button on a corner of the screen, and then it would start a countdown to start the game. And so I had Matthew. I told him, I'm like, hey, you want to make a theme for us, like a sports song, and then we'll use that as the starting song. And so he made that song, and we used I had it loaded up on a phone. I actually had a dedicated phone in the office just to play the countdown app that played that song. Our app also had a button in the center where you could hit it when you put an ace of spades out. Because when we play, you call out the name of the card when you put out aces. And so when you play the ace of spades, instead of saying spades, you could push the button and it would play a clip from Ace of Spades by Motorhead. and so we had that. Obviously, we couldn't continue that into the version we released because we did not have the rights to use that. But we had our song because we wrote the song ourselves. And so the song that you listen to every time it starts a game of Nerds is the song that we would listen to in the office every time we played a game of Nerds. It's a bold choice. Some people didn't like it, but it is kind of like a nice, it adds a nice delay between games. It adds a little bit more ceremony to it. It was pretty good. See, I do like card games. Yeah, I guess. It's different. Yeah. I actually, there's some games that are like tabletop games that I like. I do like Nerds. Weirdly, I like Yahtzee. Not that I play it all the time, but like I was kind of like, yeah, like I probably played more Yahtzee than I played a lot of other board games, just because it's like, yeah, I could do this. This is about my style. Like it doesn't require a lot of thought, but you can actually like talk about stuff while you're playing, and I can't get too competitive over it, so it's pretty good. Yeah.
Let's see. Adam asks, have you seen Seth? I cannot pronounce that last name. Extremely popular video about extremely unheard indie games like Caves of Quid.
Nope.
All right.
I don't watch videos like on YouTube, so especially not about games. Like the last thing I want to see is other people talking about games. I remember when Indie Games the movie came out and it was like really popular, and it's just like, why the fuck would I want to watch that? Like, that's already my life. My life is the bad version of that. Like, why would I want to watch other successful indie devs, you know? Yeah, I see. Yeah, lots of simple Yahtzee likes. Yeah, I've played definitely a few roll and writes. One day maybe I'll make my own Yahtzee like.
I guess is it a question from me with games like 20th Century Food Court, what was it, Chip Wizard Professional, like games that were kind of built on like some of like previous designs or like previous things you worked on. What was like? I guess did you do anything differently like this go around in terms of presentation, onboarding? Like, did you do anything I guess to make them stand out from their original versions?
We definitely didn't do a better job onboarding people. I think that was one of the things. One of the hard things about making 8 games is that we really didn't have the resources to make 8 good onboarding loops for them. So a lot of the games are kind of rougher in that regard. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, like I'm trying to think if there's anything that we like had wanted to do that we did with these. It was kind of just about really executing the idea, right? Like when we made, like the food court really, I'd wanted to dabble in like making a game about industrial controllers and stuff, and so that's what food court ended up being. But like the way it's presented is just the obvious way to do it, right? It's about like modules and cables, and like everything else just kind of followed from that. And Chip Wizard was just like, okay, we want to make a game about integrated circuits. What does a game about integrated circuits look like? I think that was where I think it must have been Keith proposed this, where we were talking about like what does this game look like? The original idea that I had for years for this Constructor reboot was to make it like set in space and there was like a story. I'm just like, I don't really feel like shipping another story in this collection of games which already have stories. And he was like, oh, what if it was like a CAD program? So like somebody included like a CAD program on your computer, and it's just like, oh, that's hilarious, because then we don't have to do a story. And it's like actually even better from a thematic standpoint. And so we just looked up what CAD programs look like, and we found one called Electric VLSI, which looks crazy. It's just like all neon colors and like 50 fucking windows. And like we already knew that we wanted ours to be all about a bunch of different windows because we have all this windowing code in the game that we can use. So yeah, it was just like, it just like came together on its own. None of it was really stuff we wanted to accomplish.
Yeah.
Even Forbidden Path with all of its flesh and stuff, right? We just like I had wanted to make a game that was about flesh, and we're just like, okay, this should look like a '90s like kind of horror game, like a H.R. Giger inspired game or something like that. Not necessarily the same reference, but like that kind of coming from that kind of place from like who made this game in like the fictional universe, and it just all came together. Just start drawing little flesh tiles, and it does all the work for you.
Yeah, the Forbidden Path, that was one that, it was definitely the trickiest one, at least for me to learn, because it kind of was like thrown in. But I did eventually start to win it, or get through a few of the earlier puzzles in it.
Yeah. I started adding some tutorialization to it, but it was like, it's hard to describe, and it doesn't really seem appropriate for like what the theme of the game is. And so that was where just like, you know what, we could just not include a tutorial, and we could just try to like give enough hints to set people off in the right direction, and then maybe make it kind of feel like a game where there was a manual, but because it's pirated, you didn't get the manual. Right? Because that's one of the I have an Amiga set up, like an old Amiga set up in my living room, and I have a bunch of games on it, but like I don't have the manuals for any of them, and they just dump you in, and they are impossible to figure out how to play. And even with the manuals, they're really hard to figure out how to play. And so I think we kind of hit the good version of that, because I've seen a lot of people figure the game out on their own, as opposed to a lot of those games are truly confusing with bewildering interfaces. But I don't know, a lot of people get confused by it too. We definitely did not do an A+ job with the tutorialization in Last Call, but it was already kind of like a game for the fans anyway, so I feel like it's maybe okay.
I will still say that I think my peak of playing is I did get the 10 wins in the Solitaire achievement. I think that may be like the highest thing I will ever get in a Zachtronics game.
That's funny. Yeah, the Solitaires.
Let me see. Okay, time check. We are about an hour and 25 minutes in, so I think other than kind of talking about like what's coming next, I'm about out of questions, so I figure maybe another 10 to 15 minutes of that works for you.
Yeah, I think I can. I've got about 10 more minutes of cool air left in here.
Okay. So I think for the audience watching, thank you everybody for all your questions and comments. This will be, no pun intended, the last call for questions for Zach. Let's see. No question. Let's see. Rob K. Not a question, but I love how you make games about things that you're interested in and do things that are just fun. It's what I think makes it so that my circle immediately knows the name Zachtronics.
Yeah, I mean I don't know. You gotta. I don't know. I'm bad at doing things because I should do them, right? So that's always been my motivation, is just doing stuff because I wanted to do it. It's a tough thing to balance, I guess. Is like I always do feel like as a game designer, you're supposed to make games that people want, right? So you're supposed to be doing it for them, but it's like, no, I'm really always doing this for me. I think that was one of the things that really made it hard for me to teach, is that I do everything for myself, and it's much harder to do that in a school setting because it's much more obvious that that's not like what you should be doing. So with games, you can kind of get away with it. People are like, "Oh, he's such a weird auteur with his weird games," and in a classroom, you're just a shit teacher. So
Before we get to some of these other questions that came in, one of the things I would just want to ask you about with Last Call, what was your favorite game to work on out of the collection?
well, that's a good question. I don't really. I guess like from a programming standpoint, they were all boring, and I didn't do any of the hard work, so that was easy. Which ones were the most fun to design the puzzles for? Uh, Chip Wizard was pretty good because I feel like Chip Wizard was so simple though. The puzzles were pretty easy to make. The game was easy to implement. It came together quickly. Um, I don't know. Honestly, like the whole thing is a package, right? Like it really wasn't that like some of them were fun and some of them aren't. Like they were all like it was really fun to be able to do so many different game design activities, right? So there I don't know. There really isn't like a favorite. I know the hardest one was Food Factory. That game was like shocking for us, having made so many games like this. That one was a struggle to figure out how to represent all of the different machines and all the different like ingredients and how they interact. Usually, like in Opus Magnum, every puzzle's just made out of marbles that you glue together, right? There's like one system and it just works, right? Every puzzle in 20th Century Food Court is its own set of logic about what combines with what and how they combine, and some things stack and some things count and some things cook. And I actually had to create like a separate like data structure for every puzzle's products that kind of represent all the different combinations of it. It took forever to get all that right. We even still shipped with some bugs where like, oh yeah, like when you're doing the like the Southern food restaurant, like the 3 different sides, you can just use all the same side and it'll work. And it's like, oh god, like I had to manually code up all of that stuff. It was quite complicated. But that's not like fun. That was just like, oh, that was a tough one.
So here's another question. What's your favorite like solitaire version that you've put into your games?
Oh, favorite solitaire.
Or do you even have one?
Some of them are definitely better than others. Like the Exapunks one is not very good. I played a lot of Shenzhen Solitaire because it's the only one that was on my phone, and that was the only game I had on my phone. And I had a lot of boring meetings, like when I was a teacher. So I played like I've definitely went. I probably won like 200 games of that over the course of the year. There's a lot of that. That's a good one. There's a new we're working on like a solitaire collection, and I have a new solitaire game for that. And it's bullshit for me to talk about it because I'm not going to tell you anything about it. But it is my favorite of all the solitaire games I've made. It is the king of solitaires, I believe. I don't know. I really like it. It's very. I like it a lot more than any of the other ones I made. But I don't know if it's actually better. Hopefully, we'll have that out at some point.
All right. Let's see. Chat again. Okay, so I guess speaking about what you're doing later, I guess Xavier wanted to ask, are you thinking about staying in the game industry or moving on to somewhere else?
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough to tell. I think the only thing I can do is games. So it's gonna have to be something games related. But I don't think I'm just gonna like land at like a boring game studio.
You can get back to working on that factorial like you love so much.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know it. Yeah, stuff with trees and resources and shit. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure yet. We're still trying to figure that out. Ask me again in 6 months.
All right. Let's see. Princess Castle Quest asks, what are your favorite games? Favorite game style or, programming specifically, anything like that?
Oh, I don't really. I'm not like over the last 10 years. I've stopped liking games. It kind of happened slowly. It was alarming at first, but now I'm just so far deep into it that it's just like, yeah, obviously I don't play games. The only game I play is Rocksmith, so it lets me feel like I know how to play guitar even though I don't. And it's like real enough that it doesn't feel like just like a dumb bullshit like waste of my time activity like so many games do, right? I used to play a lot of first-person shooters, but I really haven't played a first-person shooter in ages now. Like Team Fortress 2, I had like 1,000 hours in TF2. That was like a lot. That's a lot for me. But yeah, no, it's Rocksmith is the only thing I play now. Super good game if you haven't played it. You need a real guitar though, which is kind of elaborate.
Yeah, I am not musically inclined, so
I'm not either. That's the thing. I am garbage at music. I have no ear for it. I've tried so many times in my life. I'm terrible at it. But like I played a little bit of guitar in high school, and Rocksmith is amazing because it just tells you what to do. So you just follow along and it just like takes over your body and you're just like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm playing the song, and you get to play along with like all your favorite songs from when you were a child that you're like, inappropriately into, even though it doesn't make any sense and they're not even good music. And it's just such a great package. And like I kind of know how to play guitar now, I guess a little bit, but yeah, it's such a great game because it's like not a game, but it is.
Let's see.
Oh yeah, Rocksmith bass. I bought a bass also, and yeah, all the bass songs are really easy to play. Yeah, it's totally recommend all of it. Monoprice sells shockingly good guitars and bass guitars for how cheap they are. It's like $100. You can get like a totally legitimately solid guitar that's just like all set up and ready to go and play Rocksmith with. I mean, it's kind of expensive as far as guitar like game peripherals go. And you have to like buy this. At some point, they're coming out with one with a subscription rather than a thing where you purchase the songs individually. But yeah, it's super cheap to do, and it's like the best. It's like the most fun I've had in years with games.
Let's see. 1000 Moon asks, when you are pushing out a game, on average, like how many hours a day, how many days a week are you working, and how much of that time is truly focused, and how much checking emails? I want to know about your schedule.
I actually feel like I spent. I mean, I guess I'm not working right now. Kind of working. We don't have many meetings at Zachtronics, right? Like I don't spend a lot of time. I don't know. There's some emails. I do all our support emails too, which sometimes takes a little time. I probably get like a solid. I have to get like I don't know. I usually work like during the weeks, Monday through Friday. Usually like 8 or 9 hours. Probably get like 4 hours of work done a day, like actually working on games. It depends. It's hard to say. I'm a big fan of long lunches. And for a while we tried not working on Fridays, but I feel like you just get like 80% as much done. You get like 50% more weekend though, so it's a good deal. I don't know. We were talking before about like the instinct to finish games. Right, and I do feel like when I'm working on a game, I'm just like, oh, we gotta finish. It's like, well, it's gonna be a year until we finish, but I still feel that pressure, right? We gotta finish this game because like I'm running out of time, like gotta make these games, and so I do feel like I kind of chafed against like the not working Fridays thing because it's like, hey, we could be working Fridays and we'll finish this game faster. We gotta get this game out. So I don't know. I'm not chill enough to not work Fridays.
So here's a question from Ori, and this is something that I know it's been mentioned on the forums a lot. Did you get any pushback about the slow download times when you're trying to download all those games to the computer?
There have been some people online who have complained about it, but they seem to get mobbed by people telling them that they're wrong. So at this end, people seem to be fine with it. I don't know. The Game Pass reviews are funny. The game's on Game Pass, and the people who leave reviews on Game Pass games are different than the people who leave reviews on Steam games. But they don't seem to like the download time that much. It's mostly there to slow people down so they don't just like blast through all the games in one go and like not really sink their teeth into any of them, because they're all like, and this is the reason we were talking before about like, do we release them like once a week or once a month or once a quarter? Like, how do you prevent people from like sabotaging themselves and then like not playing any games because they constantly feel like there's another game out there that they should be playing instead? And like, I don't really have a good answer to that, but like that's also true of like all games always, right? When somebody playing is playing a Zachtronics game, they could be playing another game that's actually fun, you know? So it's not like I can keep them from thinking about that, right? So I think maybe it's not a big deal and it's just normal. But I don't know. Yeah, it's definitely one of the weirder things about it, you know, like, yeah, I don't know. We haven't gotten that much pushback. I've seen a lot of people defending it, which I think is like, they're just trying to be like, you know, like Zachtronics, like brown nosers. I don't know. But I mean, maybe it does work. It's impossible. I have a really hard time, like, telling what it's like to play my own games, right? Like, you could just look at the difficulty in my games, and it's just like, oh yeah, like this is somebody who does not play their own games, because if they did, they would be easier, right? And I think sometimes people like make the mistake of thinking that I'm like smart and like good at my games. It's just that I'm like, I'm just terrible at like game design. I don't know. It's it's really hard to tell like how, especially when you make puzzles, like how hard are your own puzzles? What does it feel like to play it? Is the experience good or bad, or what should it be? It's hard. It's hard to, especially when we're such a small team. It's hard to know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even like I can return to the games years later, right? Like I'll still remember too much, you know? Like I don't know. I think this is definitely like the reason our bad games are bad, is just because of like an inability to clearly see our own product.
And that's certainly a topic that I've talked about a lot when it comes to game dev. We don't have the time to do that today, but it is a very challenging game. I wonder if other like people design like puzzle games and very like heavy logic based games have trouble with that.
Yeah, I mean, especially like if it's an actual puzzle, like at least my games I can design my puzzles without solving them and actually kind of play through them. And like I have a history of sometimes not playing my games as much as I should, not playing puzzles as much as I should. But I've never beat the last puzzle in Space Chem for sure. But yeah, I don't know. I beat every Chip Wizard puzzle. I felt good about those ones. I couldn't just eyeball those. I actually had to play to make sure they were possible. But I think that's one of the reasons why I like Chip Wizard that like as much as I do, is because I actually played all of them. I'm like, oh yeah, this is kind of a fun game.
Let's see. A question from earlier I didn't see. From B-Star asked, I'm a solitaire novice. Do any of the Zachtronic solitaire games generate unsolvable games?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, so many people, I mean, I don't really, it's hard to know for sure, but people write solvers and then they can kind of say like, oh, I did 1,000 games and 90, like in the Kabufuda Solitaire in Last Call, 10% of the expert like deals are unwinnable, apparently, according to somebody's solver, which might be buggy, might not be, who knows. I think like Shenzhen Solitaire, 98% of them are winnable. Some of the games are guaranteed to be winnable because like otherwise they would be too unwinnable. Like with the Sigmar's Garden, I had to write a solver and then only ship a list of winnable games. So stuff like that. Yeah. They're usually it's like depressing to play a solitaire game if it's often not winnable. So I feel like you need to get that win possibility like pretty high. And like we don't really advertise. Certainly I'd hope that the win rate was higher for Kabufuda. But 90% is pretty high, right? Like if people do a pretty bad, like people do not win 90% of the time, right? So if you lose, there's a good chance that it's because you screwed up, not because it was unwinnable. But it might also have been because it's unwinnable. I don't know. That's a weird aspect about solitaire. It's hard to tell.
I had a feeling because there were a few that just seemed like I had like no way of winning. But I did manage to get the 10 wins. I'm seldom gotten the expert win in the other solitaire game. Maybe I'll do that at some point.
That's the one that's only 90% winnable. So if you fail to get that one, you can just tell yourself that it was one of the 10% that were unwinnable.
There you go. Let's see. And to Princess Castle Quest is coming. Yeah, that's always that challenge for some of these games when it's hard to know, how hard do you make this game? If it's easy for you, surely that means it's going to be easy for everyone else, which most of the time it's the opposite.
Yeah, definitely. I think we should. I still think we should have made Mobius Front easier. I think that game was too hard. I think we shipped like a relaxed difficulty, but it's not the default, and it's like a thing you have to opt into, which makes people feel bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely think that game is too hard. It's pretty unforgiving.
Let's see, places I don't know about Neon White, so I don't know how hard. Really? Wait, I keep confusing Neon White with another. I play a lot of games with Neon in their title.
Not Neon Noodles.
Oh, yeah, I did play that one. I think I got completely stuck in that one too.
It's a very different game from Neon White.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's on my list. I've reached out to the publisher, but I did not get a key for Neon White. But the demo was very interesting. I guess. Yeah, I think we're probably getting to. I guess here's one other question that I have for you. As you were talking about earlier with like the story and the world building. Do you think that the world building, I guess, has an impact on the playability of the games? Like, do you think like it matters, like in the long scope of things, to like get people motivated to play through one of your titles?
I think people do definitely stick with games longer if they're invested in the story. I don't have any evidence for this, but I kind of get that sense that because I see people complaining about getting stuck on the game and wanting to know how the story goes down. So to me, that means that they that's the thing that's keeping them going. And that's certainly how I play games. Is when I did play games, is that I would get really invested in the story, and then that would keep me going. Ooh, excuse me. Yeah. So I think that's a thing. I don't know. It's hard to separate out like the world of the story from the game, the world of the game from the game for me, just because it's just such an important part of how we know what to make, right? Like if you don't have like a story, you could just make literally any game at all, right? How could you possibly pick what game to make if you didn't have like a story or something that was guiding you, right? So I think for me, I like doing game design that tries to model something that's like real or fake, but trying to like be something. And so the first thing you have to do is figure out what you want to be, and then you figure out how to be that. And so that's always, like we definitely didn't arrive at Mobius Front by just being like, what kind of game let's just design a game and see what the theme is. It's like, no, we're like, this game is about the US military doctrine in the 1980s as described in their manuals and how they would fare against an alternate universe American military that was, formed by different experiences in different wars. And the clash of doctrines, and we had all that shit figured out, and then we made a game that described that, and that's really the only way that I can imagine making games.
See, Those going to ask, if Zachtronics players have one feeling playing his games, what would it be?
Oh, a strong feeling to buy the game for their friends or convince them that they need to give us money. I think that's sort of the ultimate feeling you could feel while playing someone's game, is the desire to give them money. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of weird because I don't actually really, that's not really a thing. Like sometimes when people create things, they think about like making people feel sad or feeling something, but I never really think about it that way, about like making people feel something. It's always about, it's just like it's more about like a I don't even know what you'd call it. Like, I want to make a game where somebody just gets like, well, I never really set out to make a game that's engrossing. I just know what it's like to do something that's engrossing, and I just kind of make experiences that I feel like ought to trigger that. I don't know. It's just that I don't know. It's for me games. It's really more about like making, I guess, because like I have a hard time modeling like other people's like feelings and behaviors and stuff, so it's just about creating an artifact that makes me feel a certain way, and then I just imagine like people keep giving me money, right? So they must be feeling a good way about like whatever artifacts I'm building, right? Like I have a sense of what these things are, but I don't know how that maps onto other people's sense of what they are. But it's more about creating a game that makes me feel a certain way, is what it's about.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's see. I don't know part down. Usually comes some new great fascination about something I never thought about much when I play Zachtronics games. from Shining Spark. And I think, again, like, for me, going back to the comment about kind of like the physical feelies of it, I think, again, there is something about, like, just having these puzzles that you can just, like, kind of, like, sit down and just, like, really get engrossed in terms of figuring them out.
Yeah, totally.
I guess, in a way, it reminds you a lot of, like, the appeal, like, the, what was it? The Door series. Like, it's kind of like the mobile, like, puzzle, like, almost like escape room as, like, you're trying to, like, solve, like, this, a mystery box. Like, you, like, solve a bit of the puzzle, it opens up, you solve another bit, that opens up. Like, I always like those kinds of games. You can kind of track your own progress as you solve this puzzle bit by bit, piece by piece, until you have the finished thing.
Yeah, it's super satisfying. Yeah.
So I guess to kind of get us into like the wrap up for the cast, in terms of Last Call BBS, are there any plans for? As you said, like people want more models, but do you have any plans on adding more content to the game, or is content wise the game is done?
We've been shipping updates since it came out on the 5th. We doubled the number of puzzles in Forbidden Path. What else do we add? We added like an endless mode to hack match. We've got one final update planned, like big update, probably Tuesday. It might be out this week, it might be out next week. It's gonna add one of our players generated 46,000 Dungeons and Diagrams puzzles. Ooh. And so we filtered that down to about 12,000. And we're going to ship those as a sort of endless puzzle mode for Dungeons and Diagrams. And then we're going to add one new model to Steed Force. It's kind of like a remix of one of the other ones. It's like a deluxe edition of like one of the other ones. But yeah, we're gonna have that ready soon too. But that's about all we have planned for content. At that point, we'll have added something to like half of the games, and I feel like that's especially they were the games that kind of needed a little bit more stuff added to them. So I think that'll be it.
I'm excited about the new Dungeons and Diagrams puzzles. Yeah, that's for
12,000 puzzles should keep you busy for a while.
Or yes, are all the D&D puzzles solvable with pure logic or with no trial and error?
I actually don't know the answer to this because a lot of the times when I'm solving something with logic, it's saying, okay, if I were to do that, then this wouldn't be true, so that's not it. And I don't know what the difference is between that and trial and error, right? It's just that I was able to try it out in my head. And like, if I'm like trying hard, I can try a bunch of stuff out in my head and see. And I think that's actually kind of trial and error, right? So I don't know. I think most of the puzzles are mostly solvable if you're exceedingly clever like that. I don't know if any of them... It's kind of just like, I don't know, like the puzzles are all just like, they're all solvable. People have solved all of them. A lot of people aren't able to figure out all the tricks, and some people solve with way more trial and error than other people. So I think I used to think that this was like a universal thing, that they either like do or don't require trial and error or backtracking. But now I actually think it has a lot more to do with like, just like any other thing, like some people are just better at it than other people, and they can see patterns that other people would never be able to figure out. And that really changes what the experience is like to play one of these games. And this changes like your sort of meta strategy of like, how much are you guessing and checking?
Yeah, like I've played Picross and Sudoku in the past, and a lot of that, for me, just like with D&D, is just like trying to play out in my head, going, okay, if I make this a block, how does that affect everything connected to it? But I can't do like more than maybe like 2 or 3 like lines in my head for I sort of get a little confused. Okay, where did I say this was here and where was that?
I think on the whole, I think they're mostly doable. Some of the random ones are probably not doable, but that's why we have an undo feature in the game.
Wait, is there an undo feature? I saw the clear solution. Is there one to go?
Yeah. There's undo and redo in Dungeons and Diagrams for sure. Yeah, you can step backwards. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna have to look at that manual.
If you exit out of a puzzle, it trashes your undo history. So you do have to keep the puzzle open. But yeah, you can totally try something and take a couple steps forward and then undo backwards.
Okay. Let's see. Rob asks, you made a book as the zines and Nest game. Are there any other mediums you want to say you made something for or on?
Not really. I'm not going to make a movie anytime soon. Video is not really my friend. And music is not my friend. So I think we've kind of covered all the bases.
Let's see. I'm trying to think if there's any other last minute questions for me. I mean, we can certainly rant about some of the other topics for the next few hours, but I think we're almost at 2 hours in. I think we're both like starting to feel a little more.
I'm getting very hot in this room. It's
I need to go have
96 degrees outside.
I need to go have a late lunch myself. So I think we'll wrap things up here. But if you are free in the future, Zach, again, you are always welcome on for another chat.
Yeah, we'll have to wait till I do something, but
or just have you on to rant about whatever topic.
Oh no, I'm a terrible ranter. I'm just gonna say a bunch of stupid shit. Yeah, no, in the future, I'm sure I'll make another game at some point. So we'll see.
I'll be waiting for that Factorio one myself. So I guess we had a lot of people, a lot of fans in the chat. Again, thank you guys and everyone for tuning in. So I guess my final question for you then is, do you have anything you'd like to say to the fans watching, or any final points you'd like to make?
Oh, thank you for buying and playing our video games. That's sort of the nature of our relationship. I don't know. It's nice to have people like the stuff you make. Right? It's sort of like, it's on one hand, I feel like my relationship with that as a game designer is kind of fraught because it's dangerous to like people, like when people like you, right? Because then you start looking for people's approval and it makes it hard to make stuff like on your own, right? So on one hand, like that's kind of a fraught thing that I've definitely struggled with over the years. But at the same time, it's really nice to have people like the stuff you do, right? And it's like, yeah, it's a dangerous drug, I guess, but it's like, it's also nice. That's why it's a dangerous drug. And so like it's it's one of the greatest things in my life, right? Is having all these people be like, oh, that weird shit you love, we love that you love that weird shit, and it's like it's cool, right? And it's you have to be careful with it, but like as long as it's not like hurting you too much, like it's great, and I'm grateful, for that.
All right. So, do you have anything you'd like to plug, social media wise, or any other projects you're doing?
No, just a big empty hole. Yeah, stay tuned. I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to let people know about what I do next because I don't even know what I'm doing next. But there at some point you will hear word that Zach did something, maybe or maybe not. We'll see.
All right. So, everyone, I'll include links to, of course, for those of you watching, recorded to Last Call and to Zach's other games down below. So be sure to check them out if you're looking for a brain-teasing, melting time, or if you just want to play more Solitaire. There's always that as an option. And Zach, as always, thank you so much for coming on. It was a lot of fun, and yeah, best of luck with what you do next. And if you want to do more games, I'll be happy to talk with you more about it.
Yeah, great. Thanks. This is fun.
All right, so for those of you watching this live record, we're going to end things here. Thank you so much. For the new folks watching, do the liking, subscribing, and commenting. If you'd like to join my Discord where we talk about game design and game dev, there should be links down below. Information up there on the overlay. I'll be back for my nightly game streams around 9:30. And if you are a developer working on a game or just want to talk about game dev and design, I'm always happy to have guests on for future casts. So please feel free to reach out. So, again, Zach, have a great rest of your evening, and like everyone said, best of luck with your next whatever you decide to do.
Thanks. See you guys.
All right, so everyone, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. And until next time, take care.